Straight into the game test and see what this tiny laptop can actually do. At this point, running GTA Vice City at 640 by 480 and only getting around 16 FPS is, yeah, pretty rough. It feels like trying to drive an old, rusty sedan on a freeway full of high-performance electric cars. The gameplay is choppy, delayed, and nowhere near what we would consider playable by today's standards. But if we rewind the clock about 14 years, this little machine would have been a tiny hero. Back then, running Vice City at all was something to be proud of. And honestly, there's something charming about it. Imperfect, sluggish, but full of nostalgia that brings you right back to the early days of gaming. In the case of Counter-Strike Source, the fact that the FPS stays in the single digits and the screen is basically just black tells you everything you need to know. The system is completely overloaded before the game even starts. The CPU is pushed to nearly 90%, while the integrated GPU is barely doing anything. A clear sign that the real bottleneck is the memory. With only about 2 gigabytes of RAM, most of it is already eaten up by Windows, and the iGPU has to share that same tiny pool. That means the game has almost no memory left to load textures or render frames properly. The result? Slow rendering, black screens, and FPS dropping off a cliff. Long story short, the RAM is simply nowhere near enough to run this game smoothly. Next up, we tested F1 2002, one of EA Sports' classic racing titles from the era when 3D graphics were still pretty lightweight, and the focus was all about speed and driving feel rather than fancy visual effects. And honestly, I was surprised. Even on this tiny, low-power laptop, the game held around 40 FPS, which actually feels pretty smooth considering how old the hardware is. Moving on to Half-Life, things weren't as pretty. The laptop barely hit 20 FPS, so the movement felt choppy and the shooting didn't have that satisfying responsiveness. Unless you're a very patient person, you might want to avoid playing Half-Life on this machine. I also tested Halo: Combat Evolved, the very first game in the Halo series, a classic sci-fi shooter that pretty much defined a whole generation of FPS games. But on this little laptop, yeah, it did not go well. The FPS hovered around 3 to 4, which makes the entire game feel like it's moving through wet cement. The controls are sluggish, the camera barely responds, and anytime there's a scene with multiple enemies or effects, the system just completely gives up. In short, Halo is absolutely unplayable